At this point, the floodgates have completely opened for the PlayStation 5 Pro when it comes to leaks, unboxings, image quality tests, and even a teardown for the system, which is something I've been very curious about. How exactly was Sony going to pack a lot of this stuff into what appeared to be a smaller footprint than even the original PlayStation 5? In fact, based on some of the leaked specifications that just went out today, it even looks like it's quite a bit lighter than the original PS5. Well, we at least have some answers here from a video that was posted up by Tag on YouTube, which I'll link to their YouTube channel down in the description, because while Sony hasn't necessarily been going around just striking a lot of these videos and images down, I guess you never know, so for credit, I'll just link to their overall YouTube account. But what I wanted to do was go over a few highlights here that I picked out from their video when they were tearing it down and kind of give some of my perspective on it. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, there was also a feature that appeared to get a bit more tangible here with some of the information that also leaked out. I'll cover that tomorrow in Newswave, and it actually is pretty exciting for some of the previous PlayStation releases, I'll say, over the last like 10 years or so. But let's jump over here, and again, this is a video they had where they, for the most part, were just kind of taking apart the PlayStation 5 Pro and talking about it a bit in more of an informal setting. I don't know if they were just like a store, a repair store, or a store in general, and they have these in the back room. That's something I've been seeing a lot now, are just stores that get these in early, well, because they're street dated, are unboxing them and showing them off pretty freely at this point. But we can see this is the PlayStation 5 Pro here. This is with the side panels off on the disc side. So this is what it'll look like right here with we have the NVMe door. And then this door here, which we kind of had an idea what it was, but now it's been confirmed through this teardown. So let's keep moving along here. This then flipped over, and check it out. We do have the door removed, and we can indeed see the CMOS battery, the CR20, I think it's 2032 battery. But you would change this out if you had issues with the system when it comes to remembering the time when it's unplugged and it kind of resetting the settings. That's why that is easy to get to then, which previously, if you had to reset or replace that battery in the original PS5, it was kind of a nightmare. You had to take a ton of screws out. You had to pretty much tear the whole thing down to get to that point. So this, I think, is just a positive in general, and I hope it's something Sony continues to do going forward through the next several generations or what have you, especially when they start to design the PlayStation 6. As I've shown in some of the other teardowns previously with Pro or mid-gen refresh systems, typically that company will then use some of the stuff that they worked on there and learned building that system for their next generation. So at this point, yes, I do expect the PS6 to have some more points in favor of repairability with things even like the CMOS battery. Now, moving along here, they did remove the fan, and then they also compared it seemingly to, I think that's the original PS5 fan. It is actually a little smaller, which is interesting. Now, I can't quite tell from this perspective or how they had it set, but I don't know. These blades might be slightly taller. I'm curious how that works out when it comes to the cooling aspect, but as we'll get to here a little later in the video, I think Sony realized something with their original PlayStation 5 design and some wasted potential costs and material when it comes to cooling the system. And I think this is very much reflecting them refining the overall process. But yeah, the fan seems to be a bit smaller. You, in fact, can't even upgrade it with this one. It just does not fit in the cutout for the fan. Moving here, we do have this is with it completely removed, that side panel, all the screws out. And the interesting thing here is, remember that CMOS battery, it's right here. It's on its own board. In fact, it just has the wire, which just looks like a negative and positive wire coming from the main board over to here. Now, I mentioned it's a good thing that the CMOS battery is easily replaceable from the outside. But I'll tell you this, if you're a shop working on these things and you have to tear the system down to get to the board for some reason, could be water damage needs to be scrubbed out. It could be a failing component like a MOSFET or something, some electrical issue. It is kind of annoying that you most likely will have to reset the CMOS to get down to that point and remove the battery. Although once you connect to the internet, it will reset the time and that sort of thing. But this would actually be pretty frustrating when it comes to testing, because you would have to most likely set the time again to avoid any weird errors that could pop up with save data or something if, say, you have a save point set that you use for benchmarking systems when it comes to heat. So that is something that is like, oh, okay, it's kind of annoying. I guess you could technically remove this board when you're taking it apart and just let it hang off of here with the wires. Typically, you just leave the battery in the motherboard when you're maybe doing some little bits of work here and there. But again, it's not. I would rather have this as opposed to not being able to get to the battery easily from the outside. From here, though, you can see they do have a larger supplemental heatsink here. And this appears to just sit there. Like, they just kind of popped it off. And it's mostly held on with, like, thermal pads and goop, which is fine. I mean, for the most part, these kind of things can be held on with just pressure, because I think this is something Sony has realized over the past few iterations and feedback that they received from the PlayStation 5. It's that the back side of the board needed more cooling. With the memory modules in particular, many people benchmarked them. I did myself, and I found that they were quite warm. Like, they were like concerningly hot at times. And they seemed to figure that out with the Slim system, which the refreshed PlayStation 5. As they did upgrade kind of the backside of it here with a larger heatsink that then also ran to some of the power components. But for the most part, it just worked to cool this side of the metal shielding, which here, again, just a large one, which this system does pull more power, so it would make sense you'd want to cool that side a bit better. However, as we go a bit further, you can see, I mean, they absolutely connected everything to that piece of metal, that metal shroud on the outside here, and that being cooled by the heatsink. Sony seems to have realized that maybe they were a bit off with their cooling when it comes to the memory, which we can see we have 8 memory modules here, which makes sense as we're looking for 16 gigabytes of GDDR6. And then we have this little new module here, which I assume is the 2 gigabytes of DDR5, which we did see once again in some of those leaked specifications today. So they have that kind of off on its own here, which should be for system tasks, so OS level stuff. And that way it would free up some more RAM that's usable in games for developers, and most likely try to give it that little edge when it comes to targeting higher resolution, or in this case, utilizing PSSR a bit more effectively when it comes to upscaling. Over here, we do have, this is our main SSD, and then we have our chipset and everything that would be required for the system to communicate to that. We know it's 2 terabytes of SSD storage here, fast NVMe storage. But then everything else is just covered in this, connecting to that metal shroud, that metal casing, just to help cool it. Again, this seems like a reaction from Sony understanding 2 things. 1, it wasn't great on the original one, and 2, this is a more powerful system that should, in theory, generate more heat, right? Pulling through more energy. I believe the power supply is rated at like 390 watts or something, so that being like a 15% increase, I think, power draw wise from the original PS5. Yeah, it makes sense. They want to make sure that thing's cool. Now we have another shot here without that the bracket on the bottom connected. Another angle. And then we can see the opposite side. Now I am curious. I think we'll have some of these chips identified a bit more, but for the most part, I think we have like our main south bridge. We have two more chips here when it comes to storage. Remember the NVMe has, they have 2 terabytes, and it seems that's split into 4 different chips, just from what I'm seeing here, again, from some of these shots that I took. And then we have our main chip, which is kind of interesting. It's a different looking die, although, again, it could be kind of the camera angle, but it looks a little skinnier on the top here. And I would be curious, just removing the plastic and the foam barrier, if there's any little extras under there. I don't think so, but still it would be interesting just to see. When you start working with liquid metal, usually I tell people, when you get to this point, don't go any further, because if you remove this foam barrier and liquid metal flings and gets on something here and then you power it on, you could have a short and it could do damage to your system. So I wouldn't go any further unless you know what you're doing here exactly. But then we get to the bottom side, and once again, you can see how much thermal padding and goo that they used here to try to connect everything to the bottom plate, which does get to our heatsink. Okay, so the heatsink is something I was interested in to see how they would accommodate this system, and it seems very similar to what they did with the PlayStation 5 revision. Not necessarily the Slim, although the Slim continued it, but the revision basically removed the massive like vapor chamber piece of copper they had for the PlayStation 5, which I think was completely over-engineered. It was so unnecessary, which it looks like this, and it's just so much copper. And I feel like Sony, when they were making it, they of course understood the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro were just not up to the task for keeping the system cool without being incredibly loud. Like, the PS4 Pro would be noticeable with the fan when it ramped up, and this kind of felt like a reaction to that. So as they went along, they started to realize, oh, it doesn't actually need this much cooling, this much copper, and they slowly cut down on it when they went to the PlayStation 5 revision, where they removed some of the heatsink, but then the fabrication went to 6 nanometers, and it pulled less power. Well, technically they're pulling more power here. However, I mean, you can see how many copper pipes they have running all over the place, and these heatsink, the fins are quite substantial. Like, these are not like little fins or anything, so it's there's a lot of volume here, and the ability for it to cool should be pretty good. But I truly think the big upgrade was indeed the supplemental heatsink here. Them realizing that there is actually a lot of heat generated on this side, and them working to fix that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they have heat pipes running all over the place, some under the fins here, some above. They have a couple down here, one above. So it does look like they still understand that this chipset is going to produce quite a bit of heat, most likely at max load, especially when maybe you're playing 8K games, which they're shooting for. We'll see how that one goes. But at least when it comes to the cooling aspect on the top side here with the chip, it doesn't really look like they were cutting corners with it necessarily, although they also don't have a massive copper block on the top, which I do feel like probably was getting very difficult to source, especially with a lot of the supply chain constraints back in like 2020, 2021. But hey, at least with a quick glance here with this early teardown, it looks like the PS5 Pro is at least built as you would expect with the PS5. I think being a well-built system along with like the Xbox Series, we're kind of beyond the issues we had back in the day when it came to hardware in consoles, where it'd be kind of sketchy sometimes with how it was put together, and we saw the results of that with all kinds of board failures and error codes popping up. I think that's kind of a thing of the past, and the most you have to worry about nowadays is like a messed up firmware or a disk drive that's on the fritz, which, I mean, technically easily replaceable here, or an HDMI port that gets ripped out most of the time from user error. But let me know what you guys thought about this one down below. Of course, I will be doing a full teardown, and we'll really get a look at everything as I go along with that. And I think Sony will do a teardown themselves, which they tend to do with like all of their systems. I feel like they'll probably have that come out this week as well. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.